Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Jason Fridley. I'm a professor at Clemson University in the US, and I'm also the reviews editor for the Journal of Ecology. And a couple of years ago, we started a new reviews series that turns over about every year called the Grime Reviews, honoring eminent ecologist Phil Grime. Today, we're here to talk about the second installment of the series, which is called What Can Remote Sensing Do for Plant Ecology? And I am delighted to be able to discuss this series with two associate editors for the journal that did basically all the work in helping to conceptualize the series that ended up with 9 papers that are currently published in the journal. And so we'll talk briefly with these associate editors and about how the series came about and what they hope readers will get from the series. So I'm delighted to introduce Emily Lines at the University of Cambridge and Tommaso Jucker of the University of Bristol. And I'm going to first ask Emily to briefly introduce herself, what she does, and how long she's been at Journal of Ecology.
Thanks, Jason. I was thinking about this. I think I've been an associate editor since 2016, but it might even be longer than that. It's a long time. So I'm an assistant professor here in the Department of Geography. I'm interested in forest ecology. That's how I know Tommaso, because we did our PhDs in the same forest ecology group. Okay. But I'm also interested in remote sensing and in data science approaches in particular. Great.
And we also have Tommaso Jucker from the University of Bristol, who's currently on sabbatical, I believe, in Germany. Maybe you could say a few words about yourself, Tommaso?
Hi, everyone. I am usually based at the University of Bristol, but today I'm calling in from Germany. I'm at the Technical University of Munich, but based in Freising. Behind me, you can see a beautiful map in German of Bavaria's forests, which we were talking about a second ago. Jokes aside, I'm a lecturer and research fellow at the School of Biological Sciences in Bristol. And generally, I think of myself as a forest ecologist and not as a remote sensing scientist. So part of the motivation, and we'll get into that a bit, for this series was try to sort of bridge the gap between these two. And we do research on the structure of forest ecosystems and why that matters for predicting how they function and what they look like and how they might change in the future. In terms of my role at Journal of Ecology, I think I've been an editor there since 2017. So I think this is my beginning of my 6th year.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, let's talk about this particular series. So again, the series is called What Can Remote Sensing Do for Plant Ecology? There are 9 papers published in this series. Emily, maybe you could start and tell us a little bit about how this series came about.
Yeah, so recollections may vary. Tommaso might tell me I'm wrong here, but I think that the idea for this came about at the BES annual meeting in Belfast, which I think was 2019. Certainly the last one before COVID. And Tommaso and I are both assistant editors, so we were in the journal editorial board meeting and we started talking to each other very rudely, like whispering next to each other. And then and saying, we would really like to see more remote sensing, and somebody brought up the Grime series and we thought, well, maybe we should propose something. So I think we sat down over a coffee or a beer and wrote out a proposal in about 15 minutes before Tommaso had to run off and do something important. And that's really how it started. It's because this is what we wanted to read these papers. So we decided to make this happen.
Yeah. And Tommaso, why do you think we needed a group of papers on this subject in Journal of Ecology?
I think we needed these kind of papers specifically because typically we have this sort of idea in our heads that remote sensing doesn't belong in the toolbox of traditional ecologists. And as someone who comes from a background as a traditional ecologist, I'd call myself that, I did my PhD on tree rings, and I had no idea, never thought about measuring things from above the canopy with any sort of shape or form. I've actually come to appreciate how much we can do with these data sets and how actually easy many of them are to use, much more so than we generally think. And so I think this, for us, really the motivation was to sort of introduce some of these approaches to readers who might not have thought about them before, and hopefully get them interested and curious and enthusiastic.
Yeah, well, I certainly put myself in that boat of the remote sensing curious crowd and trying to figure out with no training in those particular technologies as to how easy is it to approach data sets and use them for various questions, whether you're in forests or many other places, because we have 9 very diverse papers that talk about remote sensing from the Arctic and grasslands and forests, a number of different areas. So, Emily, putting yourself in the shoes of the readers of that may not have any remote sensing experience at all, are there a couple of things you hope them specifically to get out of the series?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I would hope it sparks some new ideas and some new, new perspectives on maybe their systems or their questions. But the other thing is coming from somebody who does try to bridge this gap. A lot of really exciting development has happened over the last sort of 10 years. I think a lot of people, when they think about remote sensing, might think about land mapping, like land use mapping from Landsat data or something quite simple like that. But actually, the technology has been moving on so rapidly over the last decade. Coming down rapidly in price, going up hugely in usability. So, even someone like me can learn to fly a drone in a half day. It's very straightforward now. That I think that there are a lot of tools out there that maybe people are not necessarily aware of. They're being developed in the remote sensing literature and then engineering literature. And crucially, the tools to analyze these data are also becoming much more user-friendly and much more scalable. And so what I think is that this was a good time to bring some new ideas into the journal that just highlight how much there is available now for ecologists to use, and that this shouldn't be a daunting thing where you have to learn an entire new discipline in order to take advantage of the technology.
Yeah. I think as a reader, the pace of technological advancement is the thing that's really daunting. And I wonder if we'll need this series again in 10 years or maybe less. Tommaso, what are some of your personal highlights of the series?
So I was trying to think how best to answer this question. And I think, to me, the personal highlight of the series is the diversity of topics that we've actually been able to cover. So we have some truly outrageously varied journal sort of articles that have been published as part of this. There's everything from like mapping lianas using different types of sensors in tropical forests, either from drones or from satellites or from terrestrial laser scanning. There's review papers on the potential for linking different scales of ecophysiology using like thermal remote sensing. There's papers about plant-plant interactions, something that we really think about, like people getting on their knees and playing around in the ground and trying to understand things. How can we sort of scale these processes up with remote sensing? There's a paper in the series about the use of historical photos. So it's not just things that you would typically think about, like sitting on a satellite that's sort of spinning around Earth, but it's also thinking creatively outside the box about what is remote sensing really. And so for me, the highlight is the fact that we have been able, with these 9 articles, to really cover a huge breadth of different topics and highlight the potential, as sort of Emily was talking about previously.
Yeah, I think you've hit upon something that was really exciting for me, helping along with the editing process, is seeing the breadth of concepts that remote sensing tools can lend themselves to. You mentioned species interactions, which is not something I would have normally thought about. So agreed. Emily, I wanted to give you the opportunity to answer that question as well about personal highlights from the series.
Yeah, well, I mean, everything Tommaso said, and I think we were both really delighted by the range of people who really got involved and were engaged when we sent out the invitations, when we sent out the call. It was just really great to see so many different types of groups from around the world using these technologies. I do have I was personally particularly excited by Lean Depore's paper on using photographs. I've got a personal particular interest in reusing data. I think there's loads of data out there that just, if we slightly shift our thinking about processing, we can take advantage of. And so the idea of using photo archives, I think they can tell us so much about environmental change through the past if we just sort of think carefully about how to go about approaching them. So I really personally enjoyed that paper. I mean, I enjoyed all of them. But. Yeah.
Well, so one of the 9 papers was written by both of you and your research group, and I should say that your co-authors include Fabian Fisher and Harry Owen. The paper is called Reimagining Forest Ecology in 3 Dimensions, with remote sensing. As a forest ecologist myself, I was really excited to see your view of how forest ecology can be reimagined, but it really fits in so well with the series because it's really about how these tools can impact someone like me that hasn't thought that much about the technology. So maybe Tommaso, you can maybe just kind of tell us a major take-home message of your reimagining.
I think the major take-home message is something that Emily and I jotted down on a napkin in those first 5 minutes that we were chatting after the sort of like the Journal of Ecology meeting at the BES. And it's the idea that typically forest ecologists will go into the forest with only a tape measure in their hand, and they sort of, you have this dBA, exactly, and that's what I did for my PhD as well. And you have this, we were talking about it as sort of this dBH or diameter-centric view of what a forest looks like. And so we're typically measuring diameters and we're studying them over time, and all of our understanding of how forests function and operate is all based on this single measurement. But actually what's going on in a forest is mostly going on above your head in the canopy, and it's going above in 3D. It's happening, interactions between individual crowns and all of those processes, at least from a competition for light perspective, are all happening well above the diameter. The diameter is simply there to support the trunk for all the interesting stuff that's happening above. And so for us, it was trying to highlight that central message that there's more to a tree than just its diameter, and we can learn a lot by thinking about it in 3D. Yeah.
With apologies to those that study processes underground, of course.
which is why I tried to correct myself and say competition for light, because that is an absolutely valid point. And yes, if I have obviously a bent towards what's going on above ground, but we shouldn't forget below.
Yeah, of course. I think I've maybe had that comment when in an early draft of your paper. Emily, what about like technologies that have yet to see their full potential in studying forest ecology? What can you say about that?
Well, I think it's not so much the specific technologies. I mean, I think remote sensing hasn't seen its full potential in studying forest ecology. I think the range of papers we have out there, all of them have technologies in there that could be applied to questions in forest ecology. I think what's exciting now is the possibility of scaling, and that's because more people have these pieces of kit. They can go out and collect data. More of them are making those data available as well. So actually, a lot of what I think is pushing the boundary of some aspects of forest ecology is people making use of others' data. So things looking at like structural traits, axes of variation, are taking large data sets that are being put out there using some of the cool data science tools that are also being made available. And picking up patterns at very large scales. You know, people have been able to get into the canopy with protractors and look at things like branching angles. You know, we've been able to cut down trees and weigh them to look at allometry and biomass, but it's the scale that we can now do these because we have these technologies that I think is most exciting. So I imagine that their uptake is going to see a big upgrade in our sample sizes across a whole range of aspects of our discipline.
Yeah, I'm really delighted to hear you emphasize the issue of scale, because as someone who has surveyed forests many times over broad extents, you spend so many hours and so much personnel time on studying a tiny fraction of the area in any particular area, and thinking about easy ways and yet accurate ways to scale up is perhaps the really big advance, I think, that can come in integrating a lot of these tools that you're talking about. But okay, so you mentioned protractor, we've mentioned diameter tapes, ancient technologies. Tommaso, what am I missing if I go out into the woods? Let's even throw a meter stick in there. So I've got my old school kit. What am I missing that some of these more easily available remote sensing tools could add to in the study of forest ecology?
So I'll tell you my personal favorite in this context, because you can make many examples here. And if you're really interested, you can go and read our paper. But to me, this always goes back to, there was a moment during my PhD where I was using tree rings to study how different trees interact and trying to understand whether when you mix different species of trees, you're more likely to get forests that are more productive and more resilient to climate change, a sort of old school biodiversity ecosystem functioning line of research. And we were definitely finding this pattern in forests as people have found it in grasslands. but we couldn't really explain ecologically why it was emerging until we started thinking about what was going on in the canopy. And we realized that what was happening is that individual trees were plastically adapting the shape and size of their crowns to match what their neighbors were doing. And this complementarity that was going on above ground was in turn allowing the canopies to pack more densely and more efficiently in space, intercepting more light, using light more efficiently, and as a result, producing more wood over a certain amount of time, and sort of driving this fundamental ecological pattern that we were seeing. And that was for me when the lights sort of like the light went on, that I had to sort of change my perspective of where I was looking from, and sort of like the what's going on above there in 3D is really important. And so some of these technologies like LiDAR, which allow us at different scales to either at the individual tree scale if we operate them on the ground, or entire canopies and landscapes if we operate them from an airplane or from a drone, I think can really transform our understanding of the processes that shape sort of the structure and function of forests. In particular, obviously, you could apply it to other ecosystems as well.
Yeah, that's a great example because, of course, stuff that is still easily measured, like taking leaf samples in the canopy, relatively easy, depending upon the size of your canopy, can be combined with those morphological measurements to yield new insights into plant function and plasticity and interspecific variation and all those great things that mediate coexistence, which is something that Journal of Ecology, is really interested in publishing, as it always has been. So that's a great point. Emily, I'm going to give the last question about your paper to you, and I'm wondering about the near future, the kind of next steps. What are the new doors that are opening with remote sensing technologies that we're going to see in the next couple of years?
Well, I think for ecologists, the key part here is the combination of remote sensing technologies, these very big data set and deep learning approaches. Because as ecologists, we're interested in individuals, and when you've got shed loads of three-dimensional data over very large areas, it can be hard to pick out those individuals. So there are some really cool new tools coming out from deep learning that can automate that segmentation of individuals. And once we can do that at scale, then using things like drones to look at very large numbers of individual trees across very large landscapes is going to really change how we think about forests. I come from a background of using national forest inventories, and they're just not available for most parts of the world. But with drones, we can get over very large areas. We can pick out individual trees and identify species or functional traits from them, which we're definitely starting to see the evidence that we'll be able to do. Then I think this kind of technology is really going to change how we can monitor environmental change, and allow us to do things like collaborate with geneticists and physiologists to look at how we can pick up resilience in ecosystems, dieback in ecosystems at much, much bigger scales than before, and provide the kinds of evidence that we need to protect ecosystems in rapidly changing world.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned data integration and computational approaches as being so essential to what someone like me that doesn't want to work in the background on those things and doesn't have the skill set to do so, but nonetheless is so essential to giving a product that I can use and maybe go collaborate with people that also don't do remote sensing, but do metabolomics and other things.
But it is crucial that ecologists do that collaboration, working with computer scientists who might not necessarily have the background to be able to interpret the data correctly. So we really need to build those collaborations and work together, not wait for them to produce the tools for us to use.
Great point. Well, fascinating. I'm so delighted that both of you chose to volunteer your time really to produce an absolutely spectacular 9-paper series in Journal of Ecology. Again, the series is called What Can Remote Sensing Do for Plant Ecology? All 9 papers are out, including that of Emily Lines, who is joining us today, and also Tommaso Jucker, who is joining us, the associate editors that were responsible for this series. So thank you both for talking about your paper in the series. And thanks everybody for tuning in. See you later.